Picture this. It's a random Wednesday. Nothing special about it. You're going about your day, and then your phone rings. Or you get a notification. Or you open the hood of your car, and something's wrong. Nothing catastrophic, just a problem. A $200 problem. Maybe it's a car repair. Maybe it's a prescription that costs more than you expected. Maybe it's a utility bill that came in higher than usual, right at the wrong time. $200. That's it. And for a lot of people, more people than anyone wants to admit, that $200 moment is the beginning of something that follows them for years. Not because they made a reckless decision, not because they were careless or irresponsible, but because the system they were living inside had no room for surprises. And when life surprised them anyway, the way life always does, the only option that felt available was to borrow. And that borrowing, quiet and reasonable seeming in the moment, has a way of not staying small. Hi, my name is Alpha. And in this video, we're going to trace exactly how one small financial emergency, the kind anyone could face on any given Wednesday, can quietly unravel into years of debt. And more importantly, why that happens, and what the way out actually looks like. Because this isn't just a money story. It's a psychology story. And once you understand how the spiral starts, you'll see it completely differently. Most conversations about debt start in the wrong place. They start with the debt itself, the credit card balance, the interest rate, the minimum payment. And then they tell you to stop spending so much, to be more disciplined, to make a plan and stick to it. Like the problem is a character flaw that just needs correcting. But that framing misses something important, something that happens before the debt, before the credit card comes out, before the decision gets made. It misses the moment of no options. Because here's what most people in debt have in common, and I want you to really hear this. They didn't borrow money because they wanted to. They borrowed money because they had no buffer, no cushion, no small pile of cash sitting somewhere that existed for exactly this kind of moment. And without that buffer, every unexpected expense becomes a crisis, and every crisis has a cost. Not just financially, emotionally too. Because when you're living without a safety net, you're not just managing money, you're managing fear. Every month, and that level of chronic financial anxiety changes how you make decisions in ways that aren't always obvious. The debt isn't where the problem starts. The vulnerability is. And the vulnerability is far more common than people realize. Because nobody talks about it until the debt is already there. Let me walk you through how this actually happens. Not in the abstract, in real life. Meet James. James is 31. He works a steady job, makes decent money, covers his bills every month. On paper, he's fine. But if you looked at his bank account on any given day, you'd find a few $100s, maybe less, sitting there between paychecks. He's not behind. He's just tight. The way a lot of people are tight without really talking about it. Then one morning his car makes a sound it shouldn't make. He takes it in. The mechanic says it's a belt, not the worst thing, but it needs doing. $220. James doesn't have $220 liquid right now. Not without making the rest of the month uncomfortable in ways he doesn't want to think about. Groceries getting creative, a bill getting paid late, things getting awkward. So he puts it on the credit card. Just this once. He'll pay it off next month. Here's where the math starts working quietly against him. He doesn't pay it off next month, not fully, because next month has its own expenses, and the month after that, something else comes up. The balance sits there at $220, and then climbs a little as the interest adds on. At a fairly typical credit card interest rate of somewhere around 20% annually, that balance starts costing him money every single month just to exist. Even if he never charges another thing. He starts paying the minimum, which on a small balance feels fine. It's only $10, $15 a month. Manageable, reasonable, but here's the thing about minimum payments that doesn't get said clearly enough. They are designed to keep you in debt as long as possible, not to help you get out of it. The minimum payment on a card at 20% interest barely touches the principal. You're mostly just paying the cost of borrowing. And life keeps moving. Another small emergency. Another month where the full payoff doesn't happen. The balance grows slowly, steadily, in the background, the way water rises without anyone deciding to flood the room. 2 years later, James has a balance of around $800 on that card. He didn't go on a shopping spree. He didn't make any dramatic mistakes. He just lived. in a system that had no margin, and every small surprise left a residue. And now something else has happened that doesn't get talked about enough. The psychological weight of carrying that balance has changed how James thinks. There's a concept in behavioral economics called debt stress, and it's real, and it's measurable. People carrying debt, even relatively modest debt, show elevated cortisol levels, reduced cognitive bandwidth for financial decision-making, and a higher tendency toward what researchers call tunneling, where the mind becomes so focused on the immediate pressure that longer-term thinking becomes genuinely harder. In other words, the debt makes it harder to think clearly about the debt. That's not weakness. That's stress physiology. The same mechanism that narrows your vision in a physical emergency does the same thing in a financial one. So James is now not just paying interest. He's thinking less clearly about money because he's anxious about money. He's more likely to make small impulsive purchases as stress relief, not because he's irresponsible, but because his brain is looking for momentary relief from chronic tension. He's less likely to think about long-term investing because the short-term feels too urgent to look past. The $200 car repair didn't just cost $200. It cost him the mental space to manage his finances well. And that invisible cost is the one nobody puts in the spreadsheet. Now multiply James's story by the millions of people living in the same tight margin, and you start to understand why this isn't a personal failure story. It's a systemic one. Studies consistently show that roughly half of adults in developed countries couldn't cover an unexpected $400 expense without borrowing or selling something. Half. That's not a fringe situation. That's the norm. And a world built on that level of financial fragility is a world that generates a lot of debt. Quietly, steadily, one small emergency at a time. Here's the realization that reframes everything. The debt isn't the enemy, the gap is. The gap between what life costs on a normal month and what life costs when something goes wrong. That gap, when it's filled with nothing, gets filled with debt by default. It has to be filled with something. And if you haven't intentionally filled it with savings, the credit card fills it for you, at interest. So the real goal, the thing that actually breaks the cycle, isn't paying off debt through sheer discipline. It's eliminating the conditions that created the debt in the first place. It's building something small but real that stands between you and the next Wednesday emergency. This sounds simple. It isn't always easy. But the logic of it changes everything. Because once you have even a small buffer, even $500 sitting somewhere untouched, the math of your life changes. The $200 car repair stops being a crisis and becomes an inconvenience. You pull from the buffer. You rebuild it over the following weeks. The credit card stays at zero. The interest never accumulates. The stress never spikes. And your brain stays clearer to make better decisions, to think longer term, to not feel like you're constantly one surprise away from something unraveling. A small emergency fund isn't just a financial tool, it's a psychological one, and its value extends far beyond the dollar amount sitting in it. So what does this look like in practice, for someone who is already in the cycle or trying to avoid entering it? The first move, and I mean this as the genuine first priority before anything else, is to build a starter buffer. Not a full emergency fund, not 6 months of expenses, just $1,000. Sitting somewhere you don't regularly look at, separate from your main account, not connected to a debit card you carry around, $1,000, whose only job is to absorb the next Wednesday surprise so that the credit card doesn't have to. If that feels impossible right now, start smaller. $500, $250, even $100 changes the equation slightly. It means some surprises get absorbed completely, and the ones that don't at least get partially covered without going fully onto a card. The second thing is to look honestly at any existing debt and understand what it's actually costing you monthly. Not the balance, the monthly interest cost. Take your balance, multiply it by your interest rate, divide by 12. That number, often surprisingly high relative to what you're paying, is what you're paying to have borrowed that money. Seeing it clearly tends to shift something. It makes paying down the balance feel less abstract and more urgent. And the third thing is to separate your accounts so that saving happens without a decision every month. Open a second account, even at the same bank, and automate a small transfer into it on payday. Even $25 a pay period builds over time. The automation is the key, because it removes the decision from the moment of temptation. which is exactly when willpower is least reliable. None of this requires a dramatic overhaul. None of this requires perfection. It just requires the next right small move. I want to come back to James for a moment, because his story doesn't have to end at $800 of slowly growing credit card debt. The thing about the cycle we've been talking about is that it has an entry point, but it also has an exit. And the exit isn't dramatic. It doesn't require a windfall or a raise or some perfect moment when everything lines up. It just requires building a small amount of breathing room, enough that the next emergency doesn't become the next debt. That's it. That's the whole unlock. If you're carrying debt right now, even debt that feels embarrassing or heavy, or like it's been following you for longer than it should, I want you to know that the fact that you're here, watching this, thinking about it honestly, means something. Not everyone does that. Most people avoid looking at the numbers because the numbers feel like a verdict on who they are. They're not. They're just data. Data about a system that had no buffer. And systems can be rebuilt. You don't need to fix everything this week. You just need to do the next small thing. Open the account, set the transfer, look at the number, start. Because the distance between staying in the cycle and stepping out of it is almost always smaller than it feels from inside it. And progress, quiet, undramatic, consistent progress, always beats the perfect plan that never quite starts.